So today I'm going to interview my boss. You are welcome, Chris. Chris is the founder and the CEO of Strategy Tools. And this is my last guest for this show. We are trying to imagine some issues about the upcoming new normal. We of course, we know we don't have the crystal ball. On the other hand, we are strategists, and as strategists, we do have the responsibility to try to figure out new ways, new paths, and to develop some scenarios for the near future. So, hello, Chris. You are welcome. Come on.
Hello, Tiago. It's nice to be here.
Wow, it's really nice to have you and to close this show with this final interview with you. It's an honor to me. I'd like to ask you, Chris, to begin with kind of let's say, an overview on what is happening now, and also if you could tell us a little bit about what do you figure out on the coming months, and of course, on regard of your international experience from Malaysia to the Silicon Valley, help us to understand this new normal in the broader sense that we can, in a worldwide view, please.
Yeah, so Tiago, that's a good question. It's a big question, and I think the new normal is going to be quite different than the old normal. I think a lot of things are going to change, and probably more so than we were expecting at first. And we can start with international travel, flying places. Now, some airports have opened up again, but what I'm seeing is that many airports are closing back down again. So I think the idea of international business travel is going to stay challenging for maybe even a couple of years. Education is absolutely going digital. A lot of schools are now realizing that not only can't they bring students back to campus, but a lot of students don't want to go back to campus because they want to have digital education and digital option. And we have, of course, a lot of consulting, a lot of accelerators, a lot of innovation clusters, and all of these industries, all of these companies are now learning to go digital and fast. So I think it's an interesting time, but of course it can be challenging for some.
Cool. And these logistics, the slowing on travels, and also some troubles in the supply chain, I may say, is this a symbol for the pandemic, or is it, or could it be a symbol for the future? Does this change came for good, or this is something only for us to pass through the next months?
Oh, so there's a famous quote. I can't remember who first said it, but it was something like, there can be years where nothing happens, and then years of change can happen in just minutes, or at least just weeks. And I think this is one of those times. This is not a question of returning back to the old normal anytime soon. It's going to be with us much longer. It's going to have impact far beyond what we first could imagine. And of course, for some companies like Netflix, like Microsoft, like Apple, like Facebook, and a lot of the digital companies, this is fantastic news. I mean, I've invested in a video conferencing startup. Very, very good development. But for a lot of companies, it's really challenging because they're not set up for this. And I think we're going to see a lot more challenges for a lot more companies in the coming months.
Okay, so there are, of course, those who have been the winners and those who have been the losers. It's always like that whenever we face a crisis, isn't it? But could you tell us about some specific industries For example, if we take the energy and the oil and gas sector that I know you have been working with for a quite long time, what could you tell us about the near future and the trends for this industry?
Yeah, so it's true. I've been working with a lot of different energy companies now for really the last 10 years, and I think the big headline is everyone knew that industry shifts were happening and we were shifting towards renewable, but nobody believed it could happen this fast. That's kind of the headline. And we've had, in the last 6 months, we've had a decade of change happen in just 6 months. Every single energy company I talk to, from Norway, Middle East, Asia, UK, US, all of them are saying, wow, this thing has happened so much faster. And there are many reasons for it, of course, but cars aren't driving, buses aren't driving, planes aren't flying, so the global demand is down. But also there's a lot of government initiatives, government funding, government program, including the EU, that is really pushing this green economic shift. And those things are just happening at a very accelerated pace. So it is very, very challenging to be a traditional oil and gas company today.
Okay. And Chris, you've been working on the, let's say, the strategists development programs that we do have in our platform. You have been dealing with different companies around the world. You are a coach and a mentor for different executives in different countries. Let's speak a little about leadership. Do you think that in general, business leaders are well prepared for this, not VUCA world, but as you said to us in one of our last meetings, this mega VUCA world? How prepared are we as business leaders for this upcoming new normal?
I think overall we are very, very ill prepared or underprepared. And this goes for big companies, for smaller companies, and also for governments. And there are many reasons for it. One reason is simply just human nature. I mean, people have a tendency to project forward what they know from the past. So you get a very sort of stability lock-in based on your previous experiences. Second, and we saw this in the digital workshop we had yesterday, people are just not willing to think about and face the medium to worst case scenarios and the consequences. Quote, it's just too difficult, it's just too uncomfortable to think about, end quote. So no, I think the very, very large majority of decision makers, both in industry and in politics and government, are completely not prepared.
Well, we've been going through different online programs in all the countries that Strategy Tools are working in. Here in Brazil, as you know, we've been developing not only strategists through our programs, but also helping some companies to try to develop scenarios. I think that one specific challenge that I see business leaders facing is that afterwards, facing the facts and afterwards passing through, let's say, the denial phase, we are now getting not comfortable, but for a necessity, we are now seeing organizations not only thinking in the coming back for the old or whatever a normal we can call it, but feeling themselves aware of thinking on an in-COVID strategy, not only a post-COVID strategy. Is there would be a difference for a strategist on thinking on an in-COVID strategy or a post-COVID strategy? Is it the same? Should it be the same? How could we figure out an ambidexterity in terms of business strategy for our organizations? Speaking not only on long-term view and a short-term view, but specifically on an in-COVID situation and a post-COVID situation, because we still don't know when we are going to have the vaccine and so on. So how would strategists position themselves in the strategic job?
Well, let me share with you a story on this. So, to illustrate the difference, imagine that you are home at night and suddenly you wake up and you realize that your house is on fire. It's burning. So in the first scenario, you grab your family, you grab your kids, you maybe grab the cat, and you run outside and you see that your house burned down. And then you say, okay, now we are post-fire. We have to rebuild. Fortunately, we have insurance and nobody got hurt, so it's not so bad. Let's start rebuilding. The other scenario is, you are sleeping, you wake up at night and your house is on fire. And you basically run around in circles inside your house while it's burning. Maybe you have your children outside, but you can't find your wife. She's somewhere in the house. You can't find your cat, but you're busy, cleaning the kitchen. You go and check on the car. Not that it really matters because you have insurance, but you still check on the car. And the house is burning and you're just running around. And that's really what it's like when you're in COVID strategy. It's completely different, extremely difficult, extremely chaotic, extremely uncertain and volatile. And just like you don't know where the flames are going to spread, you don't know where the virus is going to spread. We could have every single country in the world go back to lockdown completely again because we just don't know where this fire is going to take us. So for an in-COVID strategy and an in-COVID strategist, it's a completely different job than the post-COVID. So I think you should try to understand: are we outside or are we inside the house because it's burning?
And I think that sometimes we think that we are outside, sometimes we feel ourselves inside. And dealing with the second wave or maybe a third wave, we can feel simultaneously with a foot inside and another foot outside the house. But I love your analogy.
Thank you. No, I mean, it would be very stupid if your house is burning, you get your children, you get your wife, you get your cat, and you only walk to the kitchen and you stop in the kitchen and say, guys, we're safe now. It's okay. There's no more fire. And, it's like, dude, we should go outside to make sure that we're safe. But I think a lot of companies, I think a lot of countries are going to be running around inside the house for quite some time.
Cool, that's nice. Well, let me take on the analogy, because when we talk a lot about strategy as innovation, and we talk about, for example, the difficulty that we have now on dealing with reliable data, and nowadays we don't even have data sometimes. Mm-hmm. So the analysis focused strategy way of thinking, it is being challenged for some years ago already, and maybe now much more. As you know, I've been interviewing also some chief strategy officers here in Brazil. Mm-hmm. And most of them, when I ask, what would you like to have if you could ask to the genius, if you could have by magic something that you don't have now, what would you like to have at your disposal? And most of them tell me that they would like to have reliable data for data-driven decisions. Yeah. But usually I follow the answers questioning exactly that. But tell me, indeed we do not have not only reliable data, but sometimes when we think about creating new markets, new business models, disruption, there is no data. We've got to imagine and think about a future that is completely different from the past. So, Chris, we've been speaking a lot about this inside Strategy Tools, but for our listeners here to this podcast, tell us a little bit about this new school of strategy, as I like to call it, much more based on imagination, creativity, an offensive way of doing strategy, in a sense that we are not only defending or protecting our core business, but let's say trying to disrupt ourselves. How could the strategists that are willing to become these future strategists, how should they develop themselves? What are the key components for being these new strategists that companies need?
So that's a great question, Tiago. I think we'll take it one step back, and I think it was probably Clayton Christensen that asked this question, also leading up to the next global Peter Drucker forum. Does data belong in hell? Question mark. Does data belong in hell? And I believe that what was implied by the question was, we have such a strong data focus, but by its very nature, we can only have data about the future. We can only have data about things that have passed. And what we need now, sort of bridging my comment and your question, is we need to be able to work without the data. We need to be able to work much more based on future projections, based on scenarios, based on a very, very volatile landscape and industries. We need to recognize that a very traditional data-driven way of doing strategy just doesn't work anymore. And there are many reasons for this, but the primary reason is speed. A lot of things are moving much faster, and a lot of companies, especially digital companies, are able to launch new ventures at an unprecedented speed. So if you're doing strategy the old traditional way, it just doesn't work. Now, in terms of how do strategists get started on this? I think first it is a personal reflection. Do I believe that my current way of working is still going to be valid in 10 years' time? Or do I sense on a deep personal level that I, as a strategist, as a strategy leader, I need to change my way, I need to change my thinking, I need to change my mindset and my toolkit. And without that deep personal recognition, I think it's going to be hard to make that change. Now, if you do make that deep personal reflection and transition, there's a lot of places you can go. I always love pointing to Rita McGrath's work. I always invite people to join the Strategy Tools platform and the Global Coaches community. But first and foremost, I think it is a deep and long personal journey to unlearn old ways and to learn the new ways of doing strategy.
Cool, nice. Let's move from the strategist himself to the strategy team, let's say. Some 6 months ago, when I was in Stavanger, Norway, with you, we had some interesting conversations on changing from the bureaucratic strategic planning as usual way into strategy as a journey, strategy as a continuous journey. And we also went with you to meet some of your clients there in Norway, some big companies, by the way, and we could see it happening. We could speak with heads of strategy who did actually a transformation in the way they used to handle the strategic schedule in the organization. Tell us a little bit about this changing from an annual strategic planning with quarter reviews into a strategy as a journey way of work.
No, so again, a great question, Tiago. I think what I often talk about is what we with strategy tools, what we bring to the table is not a new strategy. We're not going to come in and make a new strategy for you, but we're gonna come in and help you change the way that you make that strategy, and there's a profound difference. And a lot of people are a little bit hesitant at first because they say, well, I invite you in and I expect us to make the new strategy and come up with 30 slides, come up with facts and answers, come up with data-driven analysis. And we push back and we say, no, we're not here to make the 30-slide strategy presentation. We're here to fundamentally help you to think differently in terms of how you go about the very process of making and shaping that strategy. And that's a stretch. So, there are two very different schools. The first school that you mentioned is the traditional strategy consulting, and there's nothing wrong with it per se, but it's outdated. Very data-driven, very analysis-driven, very often done and delivered by consultants, follow a very traditional template of an analysis and choice and implementation. Strategy as a journey is very different. It is like Steve Blank likes to say, you go out of the building to explore. You go out of the building to learn. You go out of the building to experience things that you didn't know. And you realize that strategy is a continuous journey. And, the strategy that we make this year, it can change into something completely different in 6 months' time. You realize that the way that you need to open up the organization, work with partners, work with competitors, work with ecosystems, is very, very different. It's profoundly different from the traditional sort of inside view of strategy. But at its core, I think it comes down to something very simple, and that's the ability to learn. And the reason why we like taking executives on these strategy journeys is because we help them learn, not by sitting on an executive education program, but simply by being out there to see and experience these things that they didn't quite grasp in terms of business opportunities. And I can give you a specific example. So I work with many energy companies that you mentioned. And when I discuss with them, we can have high-level discussions on, for example, wind energy. But after 50 minutes, they all sort of admit that, nobody in this company really know very much about wind energy, for example. So our ability to have strategic conversations is very, very shallow because all of their knowledge resides in the wrong fields. So by going on a strategy journey, we go out of the building, we engage, let's say again, with the wind energy community clusters and ecosystems, so we can actually connect the decision makers to the future in a very different way. And that's a profound difference.
Nice. I love your quote, Chris, on the language. When you say that language creates realities and we must change our language, our narrative, if you want to change reality. And I like to think, as you know, that our tools are only the words of a whole new grammar, of a whole new language of strategy. And you also sometimes tell us it's not about the tools, fostering us to go deep in this new paradigm. Could you speak to our listeners here now a little bit about this much more deep and way to look at our whole set of tools and methodologies and frameworks and canvases?
Yeah. So, there has been a shift, if you will, in the field of strategic management over the last 20 years. Gary Hamel, Clay Christensen, Rita McGrath, more recently Alex Osterwalder in Ethiopia. They've all brought up different ways of thinking about strategy. But the first group of people I mentioned, including Gary Hamel and Rita McGrath, it's been very research and very text heavy, very text based. So people could read those books and read those HBR articles, and the content is excellent, it's world class. But very often those books wouldn't specifically tell them what to do and how to do it, and they wouldn't have tangible assets that you could sort of take with you and apply. So our big focus has been for the last 10 years. We need to not write new books. I mean, that's something you can do, but that's not the important thing. But we have to craft and design new tools that people can start putting to work in companies, in startups, in ecosystems, in governments, in innovation clusters. And by changing the tools, you change the language, you change the reality, and you drive change from the tool point of view and up.
Yeah, nice. Chris, we are also, we ourselves as Strategy Tools, we are also part of the new normal, and much more, we want to shape the new normal. How do you see our company in the next 5 years?
So I think three things are going to really push the development next 3 years. The first one is the world is moving digital. I mean, we've known this for many, many years. Clay Christensen and some of his colleagues, they wrote about it 5 years ago with the Harvard Business Review. But COVID has just accelerated this. So a lot of work that used to be on-site, in-person, face-to-face is just going to shift to digital. So the world is going digital also in this space that we operate. Second, we're going to grow a very large community, a very large global community of practice. I mean, we have hundreds and hundreds of people already, but we're going to grow that to the thousands and thousands. And then finally, we're going to be developing step by step more advanced software solutions and more advanced digital solutions that allows people to work quite differently on strategy. And that's a journey that we are on.
Okay, that's already a good picture for people who knows us already, but moreover for those who are maybe listening to us for the first time. And I must take the opportunity to invite everybody who doesn't know yet our platform to get in touch. And we're getting close also, Chris, to the end of this interview. I have two more questions for you. Mm-hmm. One is more, let's say, international issue. I'd like to listen your thoughts on the role of the Chief Strategy Officer, because I know that there are some countries, and most of they are in Europe, that we see the role, a very specific position of a Chief Strategy Officer. There are other countries that we can see this proper person working with this label. But it doesn't matter. Whenever we look for a head of strategy or a C-level guy being responsible for bringing strategic discussions to the board and so on, we can see that the deep reflection are much easier to be handled with the CEO and the CFO and so on. So how do you see let's say, the Chief Strategy Officer in our corporations today, but also in the near future? Do you see this role being enhanced, being increased in organizations around the world?
So I'll answer your question in two ways. I think that it should. I still believe that every company, big and small, should have a dedicated chief strategy officer. Big companies should definitely have a strategy team. Very big companies should have a strong strategy team and a strong strategy network, so you can actually work across the organization rather than just in silos. Do they have it? No. A lot of companies haven't built what I call the strategic muscle, the strategic capabilities, the strategic frameworks. Every company will say they have a strategy, and they probably do, but that's not the same. They need to build the internal capacity for strategy much more differently. And of course, as you know, Tiago, we're seeing a big need for transformation. So strategy and innovation and transformation is sort of morphing together, and that means that some of the big companies I've worked with in Asia, where they have dedicated transformation offices, they need to be able to work more strategically. The innovation units need to work more strategically as well. So this is blending, and I advise all of our clients to look into, how do we build a strategy team? How do we build a transformation team? And what does that mean for us? Because if you don't have those capabilities, if you don't have those muscles, you're going to regret it sooner, probably, rather than later.
Okay, and well, contextualizing this issue into our country here in Brazil, as I know that you know quite well too. Well, each country has, of course, these cultural issues. We know that here in Brazil, executives are really action-driven. It is something nice because we are flexible, versatile, we have initiative, but sometimes we face the opposite side of that. It's a kind of a paradox. For example, we found out some superficiality, some shallowness, some not that deep thinking that we would like to see in the strategic job, the strategy teams. So there is this paradox. It's cultural. I do think that we must take the opportunity to use our action-driven and versatile way of work into our benefit, because this is a VUCA world, this is a volatile environment, so it is nice. Brazilians usually don't have problem with change. But on the other hand, we sometimes need a much deeper way of thinking on strategy. So what would be your recommendation for us as Brazilian strategists to combine or to mix or to synthesize or to upgrade our skills considering this behavior issue?
I think one of the low-hanging fruits would probably be something as simple as conferences and networks. For example, in the US, Singapore, UK, Middle East, it's very easy for me to find networks of chief strategy officers. I've never been able to find a national network of chief strategy officers in Brazil. So one very low-hanging fruit is actually to build out and develop a national network of chief strategy officers in Brazil. Develop an association, develop a network, develop a community of practice, people that are sharing and learning together. Because like you said, you can't import the standard practices from the best schools in the world, because every country and every culture has a context. It's unique in some ways. So you should rather focus on building out the strength and the uniqueness in Brazil, as opposed to just, quote, importing American thinking, end quote. So conferences and strong networks would be one. And second, just following on that, I would like to see some original strategy thinking emerging from Brazil. Books, research, papers, case studies, describing Brazilian case studies and Brazilian companies, both rapidly growing startups and scale-ups, strategy challenges for companies like Petrobras, and others. So, Brazil should develop its own national strategy environment as opposed to copying the standard business goals in the world.
Cool, that's nice. Well, that's our Strategy Tools Brazil mission too. And I thank you a lot, Chris, for your time. Thanks a lot. I have the lucky to work with you, and I am being coached by you. And for all those who are listening to us now, as I said before, you are all invited to reach out our platform, and whenever we can go back to airplanes again. I would love to go back to Stavanger, and of course, you are always invited to come to Brazil. You come here every year, I know that, but if we can set a summit or a conference or something that could pull you and together with the other guys for a whole week here with Brazilian strategists, it would be nice. Let's see if we can in the next year. Bye-bye, my friend.
I would like that. So thank you very much, Tiago.
Okay, bye-bye.
Ciao.